And now I will pass it to Samantha Meltzer-Brody and Amy Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy Johnson, the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs here at UNC Chapel Hill, and I am so pleased to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Samantha Meltzer-Brody, who is the Assad Manandi Distinguished Professor and Chair of the Department of Psychiatry in the School of Medicine. We are thrilled to be with you today to talk about and really introduce an issue that is important to us in our work and certainly has been a focus of our work for decades leading up to where we are today. I have been particularly wearing my hat, very concerned about the increasing incidence of anxiety and depression and other mental health concerns among traditionally college-age students, undergraduate and graduate, and those individuals who are of college age, but even not attending college. And certainly the pandemic has kicked that into hyperspeed, has it not, Samantha?
Absolutely, it has. We have seen such increased prevalence of common mental health conditions, anxiety, depression, other things in college-aged people that is extremely worrisome. And it is our great hope that by having this colloquium today, we can provide helpful information. We are working very hard in many ways across the university to be able to address the issues we face now.
Thank you so much. And I have been asked about why this particular topic today of race and the intersection of various identities and mental health. And one of the things that has been valuable through this experience, it has been the significant feedback from our community about the things that matter to them, the things that are difficult, and the things that help. And one of the key pieces that we have heard from our community is that they want to talk about identity and mental health and recognize that folks hold multiple identities and that the intersection of those is important to them. And we felt that this was a topic that was big enough and important enough that it couldn't be contained in our typical mental health seminars, which we do in an hour each month and have for some time now. So we really wanted to spend some time today taking a deeper dive into that. So that is the reason for our session today. And in order, though, to lay some foundation, one of the things that Samantha and I wanted to do was to share some of the things that we have been up to over the course of the last year in particular. So I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully you all can see that. Oops, and we are not at the front, so I'll take us to the very front slide there, and hopefully everyone can see that. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that, again, I think due to this, the work that Samantha and I do, we have been invested in this particular area and working on this full steam since each of us started at Carolina and before, likely. But in particular, one of the things that we have been busy doing over the course of the last year, or several of the things that we have been busy doing over the course of last year, we're mindful that not everybody has had an opportunity to hear. We started off with our mental health summit last fall. We've done an update for folks in the spring and really wanted to spend some time letting you know what the latest and greatest is. So we have a quick presentation today that we're going to kick us off with that we've titled What's New in 2022. But you may remember that there are things that preceded this year, such as the creation of our multicultural health program in CAPS, such as the creation of the resources that we have offered through our Heals Care Network and some of the other initiatives that we started, our contract with UWill to offer telehealth services. We're going to touch on some of the new information there, but wanted to make sure that folks knew that we have had a long history with this. In particular, the first thing that we wanted to talk about, again, is our university-wide resource and campaign, the Heals Care Network. And the Heals Care Network is fundamentally an idea and a philosophy that gets back to this issue that we have heard from our campus community, that they want to reinforce that at Carolina, we have a culture of compassion and care here as Tar Heels, and that this particular approach should permeate everything we do in our interactions with one another, in teaching, in learning, in supporting, in living on campus, and that every single member of our community has a role to play. So as an extension of that idea came the Heals Care Network, which is really a philosophy and a manifestation of that. And the Heals Care Network has a website, which hopefully that you will check out there, that has a one-stop shop to be able to see all of the resources that we offer to our campus community. And there are a huge number of them. There is a huge number of them, but not just see the resources. There's actually a tool in our resource hub that you can identify some key areas of interest for you, some identities that you may hold, some particular, whether it's clinical or non-clinical, online or in-person resources that you may be most interested in. And the resource hub will provide for you a set of things that may be best fits for you. So that in particular is something we hope that you'll check out. And we also have on the Heals Care Network website some other terrific resources. Our listener program, which is our student-focused peer-to-peer chat program that we've partnered on with our peer support corps here at Carolina, that's been very popular with our students. It has resources about trainings that are offered on campus for those of you who are interested in taking a little bit deeper dive. It has information regarding suicide on campus, so how you can learn more about the issue and potentially support someone who may be struggling with thoughts of suicide. We've received great response from the community, the Heals Care Network. We're really pleased with the number of unique users that are coming to the site every day, and we want to make sure that it stays a useful tool for you. So in the event that we have omitted something that should be added, or there's something new that you are developing that should be incorporated into the Heals Care Network website, please let us know so that we can wrap it in. The other thing is this particular conversation that we're having today, as noted, is an extension of a dialogue that we've been engaged in for some time now. Following the summit, we agreed to keep the conversation going, that it was not going to be a one and done opportunity to talk about this issue, that we're going to keep it front and center on in our lives, on the tips of our tongue. And so we launched as a result the Mental Health Seminars program. And here you'll see this idea about the intersection of mental health and key things that are important to us. So last spring, we offered an array of seminars that talked about the connections between mental health, faith, and spirituality, touched on alcohol and drugs, touched on identity-based and gender-based violence. And we're going to extend that into the fall for this year, as you'll see. And then certainly today, what we're going to talk about is how, again, mental health intersects with identity. We're going to be reviewing some progress that Samantha and I are talking about right now, and spend some time at the very end today talking about what's next. What do you want to see? What's important to you? What are the topics that we haven't discussed, the conversations that we haven't had that you want to keep rolling? My last quick slide here is to advise you about our JED campus relationship. Folks may not be familiar with JED, but the JED Foundation is a national foundation that focuses in on suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. So what you do prior to a suicide to prevent these kinds of issues happening on campus, what you do in the moment to be able to address, and then afterward to be able to learn from the experience and support our community. So schools, both K through 12 institutions and institutions of higher education can sign on for a 4-year agreement as a JED campus. And UNC Chapel Hill has indeed done that. We started that relationship in February of 22. That does a number of things for us. We convened a JED campus task force. It's going to be the team and the primary sort of source that's interacting with JED and helping to advise the relationship that we have with them. In your first year, you do sort of a pre-test assessment of what are the things that you're doing on campus to address suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. Then the task force has been provided by the JED Foundation a preliminary set of recommendations regarding things that we might want to consider and pursue. I'm very pleased to say that that preliminary set of recommendations tells us we're doing a lot of the right things, does give us some good, couple of good items in each category for some feedback. And so the task force is going to actually meet with the consultant in October of this year, so next month, to talk about those and really sort of dig in on some of those recommendations. And then we also have on the street right now our Healthy Mind Student Survey. We're interested in making sure that it is a sample of students who've been invited to participate in that survey. And certainly if you're on the line and you haven't had an opportunity to do that, please do so, because it's really important to us that we get as much perspective and information regarding our students' mental health and well-being as possible, in order not only to be able to learn about the university, but to compare to other JED campuses, which will give us some valuable benchmarking. With that, let me turn it over to you, Samantha, to talk about some of the really wonderful partnerships that we have between the university and UNC Health.
Thank you, Amy. And it is really a great pleasure to be able to collaborate between the School of Medicine, UNC Health, and with the broader campus community. I wanted to share a few things we're working on here that we see as very, very positive and a step forward. There is a new relationship between campus psychological services, CAPS, and the Department of Psychiatry in the School of Medicine, so that we have our psychiatry faculty now providing direct patient care to students 3 days per week at CAPS, doing evaluations, medication management, and other things. And this is a wonderful new partnership, given how close we are with the hospital here and CAPS on campus. We're really glad to see this form. And this has been really the result of Vice Chancellor Amy Johnson work, the CAPS leadership, and others. So really thrilled about that. The other thing is that with UNC Health and the School of Medicine, there's been a large donor gift to start a new suicide prevention institute at about $25 million. This announcement will be coming out very soon from extremely generous donors. And this will be a clinical and research program. It will have an innovative approach that will really work to do state-of-art approaches to identify at-risk people and intervene. And this will have direct relevance to UNC students who often come to the UNC emergency room here or to CAPS with thoughts of wanting to end their life. And so we see this, it's Suicide Prevention Month. This month, September is, and we see this as a really amazing opportunity for us to move the bar, do really good work that ultimately helps us save lives. So these are things we're really excited about. The other thing we're working on is a new child and adolescent psychiatry initiative that will be a large statewide program to address child and adolescent mental health crisis broadly. This is bringing together private-public partnerships, including the UNC state legislature, as we think about what funding is needed for the state. Very broadly, what is the role of all of us to address the mental health crisis in our kids and adolescents that extends to college-age people? So that's something that's actively being pushed forward, and we'll have more details over time as that emerges. And then lastly, it's fantastic that this past January, there was a $1 million gift to Student Affairs to fund a telehealth contract for 5 years. And this is so important. Telehealth is partly the wave of the future. We're using it broadly. And the relationship with you, Will, that Amy Johnson and CAPS rolled out was very successful. It will continue this fall. Students think it's fantastic as well, rating it almost 9 out of 10. So all to say, these are things that are expanding the reach of mental health services for our students and making sure we are addressing head on the mental health crisis that we know is there, but also providing access that is convenient and something that students are seeing as really positive.
Fantastic. And then so just for a quick couple of takeaways here before we get into the real meat of the colloquium today, we want to reinforce that there is an opportunity for all of us to support the mental health and well-being of our community. And that is through demonstrating at Carolina a culture of compassion and care. We hope that we are providing you an array of tools to be able to do that, both through the Heals Care Network and other resources. And the good news is that we have a wealth of resources available. So we're very fortunate at Carolina in that regard. And that in particular, too, we recognize that supporting our mental health and well-being is not something that's exclusive to counseling. There are folks who are interested in the clinical approach, and there are folks who are not. And that we want to provide a little something for everyone. And so we hope that you'll find that, and that will be a resource. All right, so let's transition now just very quickly. I'm going to stop sharing, talk about what we're going to do today, which we're thrilled about. So first of all, and I'm going to introduce my good colleague and friend, Dr. Leah Cox in just a moment, who's going to lead us off today with a discussion about practicing cultural awareness and humility. Following that, my colleague April Parker is going to talk about trauma-informed engagement in the community and engage in an interactive session talking about that. And then we're going to have what I hope will be some wonderful and robust discussion in an array of breakouts that focus in on particular identities so that folks can really have an opportunity to engage and discuss and perhaps talk about some of the issues that both Leah and April will address here. So with that, allow me to introduce Dr. Leah Cox, who is our Vice Provost for Equity Inclusion and our Chief Diversity Officer here at Carolina. There's Leah. Hey, we are so pleased that she is in this role because she provides a leadership and a vision for creating a more inclusive campus for students, faculty, and staff, and she works collaboratively with all members of our Carolina community to do so. We're extremely pleased to have Dr. Cox here with us at Carolina. She's been a long-time higher education expert and leader, and we're thrilled to be able to have her as our sort of primary keynote today. So with that, allow me to turn it over to you, Dr. Leah Cox.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Amy. This is exciting for me. So I'm going to say good afternoon to all of those who are part of this webinar. And I am going to set up sharing my screen with you. So give me some grace here for a minute. Okay, and hopefully everyone can see that. Okay. I'm going to trust my colleagues who are there on the Zoom that if they can't, they'll flag me. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about practicing cultural awareness and humility. And this is such an important topic. We know that mental health is a topic that's not only impacting our campus, but across the nation. It's affecting our campus and our community. And so I'm really happy that we're providing some time and space to discuss the impact of culture on mental health. It's a topic that's too often overlooked. So today, this discussion will focus on information about cultural awareness and cultural humility. And my goal, or our goal, is to motivate you to further engage in this topic. So let me start with how we're going to spend our time. So we're going to talk a little bit about cultural awareness versus competence, and what does that mean? And we'll get into some thoughts around that, and certainly my thoughts and where I hope we will go. We'll also cover definitions and the concept of culture, cultural awareness, cultural humility, and cultural competence, and what they mean and how they build upon each other. I really think it's important that we engage in this discussion around definitions to help all of us get to a place where we understand what we're talking about. We'll also discuss what is cultural safety and why is that important. And then we'll also move into how culture affects mental health. And lastly, we will highlight the skills needed to effectively work across diverse cultures. Okay, so my hope is that we'll answer some of these questions today about how culture affects mental health and our services to our diverse community, how we'll recognize, observe, and become conscious of the similarities and differences among and between cultural groups, and how do our own cultural influences impact our values, our beliefs, and judgment that affect how we interact and work with people from a variety of backgrounds. And then let's discuss how we increase awareness and appreciation for cultural diversity so that we work effectively across our campus community. So I want to make sure that we understand some of the terms that will be used today and beyond today. And I also want you to remember that this is just a 50-minute discussion that will not answer all of your questions. And it's definitely not going to get you to a place where you have all the answers. But we will be able to begin that process. And I think that's most important. So let's move into the definition of culture. What is it? An integrated pattern of human behavior that includes thoughts, communication, languages, practices, beliefs, values, customs, courtesies, rituals, manners of interacting, roles, relationships, and our expected behaviors of racial, ethnic, religious, or social groups, the ability to transmit the above to succeeding generations. When we define culture, it's an integrated pattern, right? One way to understand culture is to think of it as the software of the mind, right? Basically, everyone is programmed by their cultural group to interpret and evaluate behaviors, ideas, relationships, and other people in specific ways that are unique to their group, right? So we are all born into a culture, but we also sometimes choose other cultures as we get older, and our identities may change. And we also are engaged in different environments in different places, which may change and shape our cultures. And so we need to always remember that intersectionality plays a large role in cultures. We also could think about culture. It's understood from a perspective of being the person observed. This is one way to think about it. You're being observed through a one-way mirror. So everything we see is from our own perspective. It is only when we join the observed on the other side that it's possible to see ourselves and others clearly, right? So seeing something from the viewpoint of others may help us to see more clearly. So I want you to remember, and it's important to remember, that culture is fluid and not static. And we'll talk more about that later. So just remember, any attempts to identify norms or values of someone who identifies maybe as Latino or Muslim, for example, may not be effective and can lead to stereotyping, because no culture is monolithic. And remember that it is fluid, not static. Culture is not equivalent to just race or ethnicity. And that's where I think sometimes we just put folks in a box and we leave them there, and we forget that it's not just race or ethnicity. For example, one could say there's an accounting department culture. They use different terms and acronyms that people outside the department may not understand. But within that accounting department, there are folks from many other cultures, right? So they understand the culture of accounting, but they may not understand all of the other cultures and identities that individuals hold within that department. So let's talk about the terms that we're going to be using and talking about today, about cultural awareness, all right? So cultural awareness, being cognizant, observant, and conscious of similarities and differences among cultural groups. Cultural competence, and there's a lot of discussion around competence. And what I want you to remember, and it is just my opinion, but not only my opinion, is that we are never all competent, right? So it is understanding culture and awareness and using it in our everyday lives, or the work that we do, or the individuals that we meet, is constant growth, right? So you are never actually competent because you are always growing. But folks define it as the ability to interact effectively with people of different cultures, and it helps to ensure the needs of all community members are addressed. Cultural competence means to be respectful and responsive to the health beliefs and practices and cultural and linguistic needs of diverse populations and groups. Okay, cultural resonance, understanding the cultural context and unique cultural and historic characteristics of individuals in designing and promoting care interventions. And then last, cultural sensitivity, understanding the needs and emotions of our own culture and the cultures of others. So of course, we need to talk about the influences of culture and where and how does that happen. So let's talk about some of these influences on culture. There's a historical and a social context to cultures, and their development, and the context of populations that can influence culture, including migration, resettlement, colonization, religious influences, and territorial shifts. So we all are probably quite aware of the migration of individuals hundreds of years ago from Africa over to the Americas, right? And then forced migration of Africans from West Africa to America during the slave trade. The former colonization of African nations by Germany, which forced political boundaries that didn't quite match cultural boundaries, right? There are lots of other cultural influences that include values, norms, mental processes, and learning beliefs and attitudes, communication and language, as well as relationships. For example, some cultures support the view of individual as being part of a much larger group or family, place importance on the well-being of the entire group. But there are also cultures that emphasize the importance of independence and the individual. So these are all things that are part of the influences. Other things that influence it would be cultures that support viewpoints that may not always be what we think they should be, right? But individuals and cultures form over time. And I want to keep reminding you that it is fluid, not static. So as we begin to work with individuals, we need to always remember some of the cultural influences that may have affected the person, their family, and the surrounding community. So let's talk a little bit about cultural awareness, because this is the big topic of the day, and what it is, how do we define it, why is it important, and why is it important to us, especially today? So when we talk about cultural awareness, you'll often hear individuals use the term cultural awareness interchangeably with other terms such as cultural safety, cultural competence. And again, I'm here to suggest that they are not the same, but the nuances of the meanings are very important. Okay. So when we talk about cultural awareness, it's important to remember that it requires a deeper understanding of individuals, of cultures, of communities, understanding our own beliefs and actions and values and responses to others, right? So that brings in the idea of bias. Awareness in the first step in working, learning, and engaging with other people from many cultures, right? So you can't just say that you are culturally aware if you only engage with one group. Cultural awareness, why is it important? One, we know that diversity is the reality of the 21st century, right? The growth, the way that we are now learning and engaging in learning, it's about being a part of a diverse community and why it matters, and it does. The increase of trust and productivity, right? So we know that when we are trusting of others who are different than ourselves, increases the productivity because we are using great amounts of mind power and ideas and innovation and entrepreneurships that we may not have thought about alone if it were monolithic. Diversity promotes inclusion and equity, right? So the more individuals and groups and cultures you add to a group, the more you start to recognize inclusivity and then focus on equity. Cultural awareness promotes a resource for creative ideas, and then changing demographics of the workforce are important. We're all going to be working in a global economy soon, and or now, depending on your job and what you do or what you plan to do. And so it's important to understand how cultural awareness will increase your career value. It involves raising people's understandings of the influence of our culture on how we do things, how we communicate, what foods we eat, or even how we go about our work. Being culturally aware means understanding why it's important and recognizing that not every person will do things in the same manner as we do. being mindful that diversity allows us to be more respectful of the ways others operate based on their cultural backgrounds. And while we may not be intimately familiar with other cultures, if you at least understand your own culture and how it affects you, you can then take the first step in developing a sense of cultural awareness when it comes to interacting with people who may have a different background than yourself. So let's talk a little bit about, again, this cultural awareness and growth. And it will be my constant reminder that it is not homogeneous and it is not static. We have the ability to interact with others without oversimplifying, generalizing, or stereotyping. And that's important in terms of cultural awareness and having the ability to focus on the individual who is both receiving or administering services, and then understand that culture cannot be reduced to a technical skill that's taught and then mastered, right? So because we do some learning today, doesn't mean that you get the certification and you are culturally aware for the rest of your life. It is a constant mastering and understanding and educating and training of yourself. Okay. And so let me just back up a little bit as we talk a little bit more about why it's important. We need to acquire deeper self-knowledge when we're able to understand the basis of our own beliefs, our actions, and how we respond to others. So that's first. Second, it's even more important we live in a diverse world. Different cultures inform the beliefs and behaviors of others, and cultural awareness is just the first step in becoming proficient and working well with people from a variety of different backgrounds. And then we remain open to the idea that others and other people and their cultures have a major impact on who we are and what we do. And that's important. So it helps you to understand yourself better. It helps you to understand your weaknesses, your psychology, how you become a better person. It also helps with cognitive flexibility, problem solving, decision making, and your communication skills. So as we are in our professional worlds, many people, including diplomats and teachers and business professionals and medical staff, find they're being culturally aware has a positive influence on what they do and how they perform their jobs. So essentially, any person with some form of cultural understanding is going to benefit, because cultural awareness is about helping people get along without misunderstanding, confusion, or poor decisions getting in the way. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about cultural safety. Okay. And oftentimes folks use this without thinking about it, but it's important. And in our environment, when we talk about cultural safety, it's meant for everybody, not just for one group of people. There's no denial or challenge to a person's identity or who they are, a space that embraces different people, and a shared feeling of respect, acknowledgement, or understanding. And that's going to be important when we talk about issues around culture and mental health. Okay. We're allowing people from different cultures to come together and work with dignity, working from a point of view of the other person. And that continues to be important. Cultural safety is individual and can only be understood individually. Attempting to engage with others from a place of wonder, right? So it is your job. It is all of our jobs to be curious, ask the right questions, don't make assumptions, and understanding and awareness of your personal beliefs and not letting them interfere with providing support, care, and services. So let's talk a little bit about cultural growth, and some would call it competence, versus cultural humility. So being culturally aware is the starting point to ultimately reaching some levels of competence, as some would say, where you can fluidly interact with people from different backgrounds and cultures without an issue, right? Understanding of people's cultures, social, religious, whatever it may be, race, ethnicity. Cultural growth or competence is the ability of an individual to understand, respect values, attitudes, beliefs, and customs that differ across cultures. So in order for us to be able to do this, you have to be aware of yourself and others and who they are, what they believe, and also accepting of cultural differences. And sometimes that's going to take some work. So according to the definition, we talked about being culturally competent or having a cultural growth mindset means that one is mindful not to assume cultures are homogeneous or static, right? Understand that individuals with a certain culture may deviate from cultural norms for many reasons. Interacting with cultural competence or growth means that you don't oversimplify, you don't generalize or stereotype. You have to have a broader understanding of what culture means, and it is not ethnicity, nationality, and/or language. We want to make sure that we don't reduce culture to that technical skill that can be taught or mastered because it's continued growth. And the references and engagements are fluid, they change. We have to do our work to keep up. And we have to also remember the intersectionalities of cultures and identities that one person could hold. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the cultural influences on mental health. I want to make sure I'm keeping us on track, on time. Okay. So when we talk about the influence on health, cultural beliefs influence our health decisions every day. Mental illness and mental health are affected by multiple factors: biology, genetics, psychology, society. Diversity in culture and backgrounds can have an influence on our mental health and experiences as an individual, right? Those cultural beliefs and influences on our health decisions are made every day. And the more we keep this in mind, the better we can address mental health and addictions and other things. Different cultures have different norms. Ideas about what's typical about health. These norms impact what people think about mental health and how they treat it. For example, talking about emotions is okay and encouraged in some cultures, and in others, it is not, right? Culture affects what we think about mental health. It affects the way we treat mental health. Cultural differences often indicate or equal to health differences. So in some cultures, mental health isn't even separated from physical health. These cultures often treat together the mind, body, spirit, and emotions as one. People may rely upon traditional healing or for care through things like herbs, cupping, coining, and cleansings, and spirit and soul. They may not believe in using prescription medications for mental health. And the physical symptoms show up when people aren't able to discuss mental health. So we have to remember that there are lots of folks out there who are not going to discuss their mental health issues. And our hope is that we get closer to making sure that we figure out ways to engage those folks. When cultural respect and understanding is not a part of healthcare, then disparities arise. Health disparity happens when health and healthcare are not equal across groups of people. And this leads to different outcomes for different groups. Good health for some and some poor health for others. So disparities can be seen in race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, education, age, location, gender, gender identity, disability status, and sexual orientation. We know that it happens. We know that health disparities occur because of the different ways people can or can't access healthcare and use available services. And again, we are hoping to make sure that all of the members of our community can access healthcare. Some individuals are affected, are isolated from supportive communities, or unfamiliar with our health systems, or they don't understand the health information that's available to them, or they are limited in their communication or their fluency in English, or lack trust due to a lack of understanding or past trauma. So where do we start? What are some of the strategies that we can use? To be culture responsive, we have to find out what people value and prefer. Learn how they communicate and share information in the language that they use. Be careful about assumptions. We often group cultures together by commonalities, whether it's language or geographic, demographics. However, it's important not to assume that just because one or two people from a group are one way, that everyone else in that cultural group is the same. They are not. Just because you speak Spanish doesn't mean that all Spanish-speaking cultures are the same, right? It's the same as saying everyone who speaks French is from France. They are not. Sometimes you're going to have to test your assumptions. So here's what we need to think about. Ask questions in a humble, safe manner, right? We do not want to trigger anyone or cause trauma. Seek self-awareness. That's really important, that we learn about ourselves and that we're aware of our biases and how we approach others. Do your best to suspend judgment, right? This will push people away, not pull them in. Express kindness and compassion. That's going to make a difference for everyone in their lives. Support a safe and welcoming environment. And this is so important. And I think that is what we are doing here at UNC as we continue to build all of the networks that are out there for our students to access. We need to continue to build those safe environments for folks to feel comfortable in being a part of the community. And then we need to start where the person is at. Where are they in their journey? What is it that we can do to help them? How do we get them to a place of healing or help? Okay. So what we want to do is make a difference. That's where we are now, is trying to make a difference in understanding our cultural awareness, what we're doing, how we're doing it, how it affects who we are, how we are educating ourselves in terms of our cultural awareness and our cultural growth. How do we know when we need more help in terms of understanding culture and growing in that area? And how we then utilize those things in the work that we do, where we do it, and how we can help others in our space become more culturally aware. So cultural factors play a role in the development of everything that we do. And we need to make sure that we are doing our best to make that difference. So understanding differences and similarities in beliefs, values, ethics, and attitudes, while developing our own sense of cultural awareness, will help us develop a culturally safe environment that we're seeking here at UNC to begin making that difference. I think it's important that we figure out which way we're going, how we talk about culture on our campus, and what's going to make that difference for all of us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if there are any questions, you are welcome to put them in the Q&A. And I'm happy to have that conversation as we think about these things across our campus and how we can be more humble, how we proceed with humility as we begin this walk. Thank you. Okay. So I think I have kept us on track, hopefully. And Sarah or Aisha, I do not see any questions in the chat, so you can take that break. So thank you for your time. I appreciate your time and your interest in listening. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cox. We really appreciate it. It was very informative. So now we will take a few minutes to take a break, and we will be back with our next presentation at 1:10 p.m.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed a little break and had an opportunity, perhaps during that time period, to focus in on your wellness. I'm very pleased to introduce April Parker, who is going to facilitate our session on trauma-informed engagement. April Parker is a clinical assistant professor in the UNC Chapel Hill School of Social Work, where she teaches courses in direct practice and serves as the 3-year Chapel Hill MSW Program Field Education Coordinator. I bet that is hard to fit on a business card, April. April has clinical practice background in inpatient and outpatient behavioral health settings and has worked in child, adolescent, and as an child, adolescent, and adult therapist. In January 2021, she was awarded the Dr. John R. Larkins Award by Governor Cooper. Congratulations. This award recognizes commitment to justice and equality in the workplace and in the community. April's practice and research interests include maternal mental health, anti-racist and anti-oppressive practice and education for healthcare workers, and innovative ways of supporting BIPOC students at historically white colleges and universities. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, April Parker. April, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Johnson, Dr. Celso Brody, Dr. Cox, and Dr. Travis Albritton for giving me this opportunity to speak at this colloquium today. This has been my passion for a long time, so I'm just so happy to share it with everyone here. But I will tell you, it's been a real challenge preparing for this presentation that centers trauma and healing. I have found that I had to stop and acknowledge my own trauma and give myself some grace. And I also thought about all of you and traumas that you may have experienced during your life. So my goal for this presentation is to tread lightly on your heart and on your spirit, while not shying away from things in our collective history that we need to talk about and reflect on. I hope you can stay with me, but more importantly, I want you to take care of yourself. And so with that, I will share my screen. And I cannot see anyone. I can't see the Q&A. So I hope everything's okay with this showing on the screen. This quote I found in a 2017 SAMHSA Spotlight publication. And it highlights the balance that I was talking about. And it reads, building resilient and trauma-informed communities is essential to improving public health and well-being. Communities can be places where traumatic events occur, and they can also help keep us safe. They can be a source of trauma or buffer us against the negative effects of adversity. Communities can collectively experience trauma much like individuals do, and they can be a resource for healing. Why is trauma-informed engagement in the community important? It's important so we can heal together, so we can make our communities whole, so we can have safe and caring place for everyone, so our children do not have to carry the burdens of our generational wounds. What is community, or what is a community? Well, listed on this slide are some ideas about the definition of community from Drs. Chavis and Lee at the Community Science, Inc. But the word community means different things to different people. I wonder what the word community means to you. People live in multiple communities. They have multiple identities. There's intersectionality. So you likely reside in multiple communities like I do. But another question we have to ask ourselves is, why is this important to me? And I've asked myself this question many times. Just before everything I do, I try to ask myself this question. And my answers have always led me on a physical and spiritual journey of understanding who I am and where I came from. I am the daughter of this beautiful woman in this picture, and that's me right there. If you can see my mouse, I'm like missing some teeth and just happy to be standing there with my mom. But my mother's experience with mental illness and many traumatic events during my life have led me to the profession of social work and my desire to help other families who are affected by mental illness. The only way I know how to break the stigma of mental illness and trauma is to speak about it and acknowledge the impact that it has had on my life. Communities are filled with people like me and my mom. Research on ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, has revealed how widespread individual trauma is in our communities. This sign represents what many of us want our communities to be: strong, supportive, a place where people look out for one another. We must not forget that our community also includes looking out for the land, the vegetation, the natural water spaces, the animals, etc. Basically, the entire ecosystem is truly our community. Wouldn't it be good to see billboards like this in our communities? But we need more than words to make that happen, to make our community strong. We need action. Now, it shouldn't surprise you that a social worker is speaking to you about a call to action 6 slides into a presentation. But if you knew me better, you would be surprised actually that it took me this long. Trauma-informed care training for individual trauma has been required in most healthcare settings, especially behavioral healthcare settings. The importance of this type of training is also recognized in the criminal justice, education, and child welfare systems. I've decided today to focus on community trauma. Dr. Penderhughes provides an excellent explanation of what community trauma is.
I'm Howard Penderhughes. I'm a professor at the University of California, San Francisco in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and I work with Prevention Institute for the last 15 years on the Unity Initiative. Communities function as the fabric and foundation of resilience for families and for children and youth. We've really come to understand the scope of individual trauma, and it's resulted in a sea change in terms of our approaches to addressing individual trauma through trauma-informed care, trauma-informed pedagogy, that But one of the things we haven't been able to concentrate on as comprehensively, and we're beginning to start to understand, is the issue of community trauma. When we talk about community trauma, we're not just talking about an aggregate of individuals who have trauma in a community. We're talking about the aspects and dynamics of a community that have been impacted by historical trauma, by structural violence, that those pieces, the social relationships in a community, the social networks in a community, the built environment of a community, and the social norms within a community, as well as the structure of opportunity and education, have all been negatively affected. We have to engage in strategies that help heal communities from community trauma.
When Dr. Pender Hughes gave a lecture in 2017, he reflected on the 1965 murder of Reverend James Reeb and the significant effect his murder had on him as a child. Reverend Reeb was an American Unitarian Universalist minister, pastor, and activist, helping to organize the marches from Selma to Montgomery. The way Dr. Pender Hughes describes what he experienced really captures the impact of community trauma. He says, "For weeks, I was scared of white people, but it was also profound to understand that there are allies in this struggle, willing to lay their life on the line for social justice." As Dr. Pender Hughes explained in that video, structural violence, historical and intergenerational trauma have negatively impacted the way our communities function. So next, I will highlight several examples of structural violence, historical and intergenerational trauma that have negatively impacted communities still to this day. The enslavement of Africans in the United States. This has had a tremendous impact on the lives of their descendants. The woman in this picture is actually my paternal great-great-grandmother, Annie. Annie was born in 1861 into enslavement in Little River, South Carolina. I don't know much about Annie's story, but whenever I see this picture, I stare into her eyes and I wish she could tell me more. During this period in history, it was often seen for photographs to be taken of Black women holding white children. But the baby Annie is holding is my great-grandfather. His father was a white man in North Carolina. For reasons that I don't know, Annie gave her baby to his father and left town. His father didn't raise him. He didn't keep him. He gave him to a friend. And in the 1880 census, my great-grandfather was listed as a servant in that friend's household. Our Indigenous community has experienced the following traumatic events. We know the removal of our Indigenous tribes from their homelands has had a tremendous impact on the trauma that those folks experienced then and the continuation of that trauma down through the generations. And then there's the boarding school era. There's sterilization of American Indian women. There's forced assimilation. There's relocation and containment and genocide. We will never forget the 6 million Jewish lives lost during the Holocaust. And there are many people in our communities today that had family members that were part of this horrible time in our history. We can't forget the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. The legacy, or I like to call it the thumbprint of eugenics, is still remaining on the community of people with disabilities. Students and community members protested in civil rights protests to end Jim Crow laws. My parents were alive during this period in time. They were going to school. So these things are still relevant. I think when we say historical, we often forget how close those events really are to our lifetime. For our LGBT community, the trauma in 2016 in Orlando at the Pulse nightclub mass shooting event. Many of our communities have experienced multiple traumas during this time of a dual pandemic. And yes, I said dual pandemic, COVID-19 and racism. This is the site of George Floyd's murder. On my left, there's just an empty street picture. That's how it looked in April of 2019. The picture on the right shows what that same location looks like in April of 2021. The murder of George Floyd was another traumatic community event. I would like you to consider, if you were a researcher or educator or healthcare worker in this community today, how would George Floyd's murder affect how you engage with this community? How many of us here today had to turn the channel or tell friends to stop sending me social media videos of Black people getting shot, beat, whatever they were sending? How many folks did that in 2020? How many of us here today felt our hearts break when George Floyd called out for his mother before he died? Even more recent community trauma in Uvalde, Buffalo, and Laguna Woods. The principles, strategies, and practices of trauma-informed community engagement are based on the social ecological model. This model illustrates the interconnected and often complex relationships of individuals and their environment. In the video played earlier by Dr. Pinter-Hughes, he identified the following factors that contribute to the functioning of communities. Those are social relationships, social networks, the built environment, social norms, and structure of opportunity and education. When we engage with communities, these are the dynamics and aspects to be mindful of. But we can't forget the role that structural violence, historical, and intergenerational trauma has had on the community. SAMHSA suggests these 6 key principles to guide community engagement that can hopefully not re-traumatize community members. I think, April thinks, community engagement must center anti-racist and anti-oppressive practices, no matter what your position, profession, or role is. Anyone that engages with communities and don't center these practices are at risk of doing more harm in spite of good intentions and may re-traumatize communities. These are some strategies that I found from some researchers that did a lot of work in California with the Urban Institute and have published many of the communities that they've actually engaged with. They've published reports about how it went, what challenges they faced, lessons learned, And I really like the strategies that they use to engage with communities. So for our researchers, community-driven research toward community organizing and policy change. This is important because it engages community members to be a part of the change process. It helps them to get their power back from harms of the past. Peer-to-peer approaches. Community members have a lot of knowledge in informal systems of support. They support each other and help provide connections to each other and resources that they need. Peer-to-peer approaches foster investment in leaders within the community and promote sustainability. Creative or personal expression and placemaking. These are a powerful way to heal community trauma and historical wounds. The process of centering their individual and collective narratives is an intentional way of taking power back, while also having their stories in a visual way in their communities. And when I think of that, I think about the beautiful murals that you often see in communities that reflect their history, but also their present. Then we have grief work, emotional support, and restorative justice as a strategy. Creating supportive spaces for community members to center culturally grounded healing practices like healing circles and culturally grounded mourning practices that allow space for collective grieving. These are some of the most concrete things that you could do when engaging in the community. These practices follow the concept of cultural humility, of cultural awareness, of cultural sensitivity. So that's why I feel Dr. Cox's presentation and these strategies and practices go hand in hand. If you're going to engage in communities that you know have historical harm, historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, and have experienced structural violence, it is so important to acknowledge harm done and promote consciousness. It is so important to honor history and celebrate culture. When you engage with these communities, even our own community at UNC, never overpromise. Communities who have experienced historical trauma have been through that before. You do not want to repeat history. So don't overpromise, because when people are often disappointed because those promises aren't coming true, you risk re-traumatizing the community and the individuals. Make community growth and accomplishments visible. I feel like Vice Chancellor Johnson and Dr. Seltzer-Brody's initial presentation did just that. So that's great. Like, let the community know what steps we're taking, what things we've done, what things we're planning to do. That's just a perfect example of that practice. Make community growth and accomplishments visible. Ensure consistency. And I think UNC is doing that in offering this colloquium today and future seminars. Support clear and meaningful community engagement structures. Promote safety. Remove participation barriers. Sometimes for communities, that means providing childcare so adults in the community can actually attend meetings and participate in activities. Provide compensation. Now, this one kind of surprised me, but it makes sense. So you may find that there are certain people in your community, likely the natural leaders in the community, who are going to be doing a whole lot of work to make this successful. So pay them for their time, just as if they were an interventionist in your research project. That's only fair. we need to also make sure that we foster social cohesion. And one of my favorite things to do in everything that I do is to provide time and space for a reflective process. So I'm actually going to ask you all to do some reflection in a few minutes. And for you researchers out there, the School of Social Work has really amazing people, of course, but one of those researchers is Dr. Trinette Clark-Goings. And this recent publication, it was just accepted, but you will be able to access it from the Journal of the Society for Social Work and Research, gives you a framework for anti-racist research. The 10 guiding principles of an anti-racist research framework that Dr. Goings and the other authors is this. Starts from the premise that racism is embedded in structures and policies that maintain the status quo. Anti-racist research seeks to dismantle racism. It centers BIPOC's experiences. It recognizes that a marginalized racial identity often intersects with other marginalized identities. It foregrounds the importance of self-knowledge. Anti-racist researchers practice what they preach. I really like that one. It involves scientific empowerment, not scientific colonization. Scientific colonization occurs when findings from research leaves no advancement to individuals, community, or infrastructure. Anti-racist researchers prioritize community engagement of the target population. Uses team science to benefit from diverse perspectives. Is concerned not only with the interpreting and applying data, but with sharing findings with those who support and those who oppose the vision of liberation, social justice, and reduced inequity. So with that, I will end this slide sharing. And I hope that some of you have some questions for me or comments. Okay, so I have one here. It says, aren't community leaders expert consultants or liaisons with the community? And like any consultant should be paid for their expertise. So yes, I support paying people. So do I. Pay people who are doing the work in the communities. And thank you for Melissa, who says this is incredibly useful. So this is a good one. How might we help address community trauma in our UNC community? I think that this is a good start, right? We're talking about it. We are letting it be known that we acknowledge that harm has been done, and we are offering opportunities today for people to go into breakout sessions and talk about these things more in areas that fit identities they would like to join into community with. Offering opportunities like that to join into community with other people on the campus, it can really help with that social network. It can help with social cohesion, and it can help us to find other people out there who we can learn from. So I really appreciate that those opportunities are being offered today. Let's see here. Okay, we have just a comment. That was very helpful, really helped me apply what I know about trauma-informed care to the whole community experience. Thank you. Here's one. After suffering a personal trauma, how do you thoughtfully advocate for your needs if there is not an established organization around you with whom you can connect? Well, if this person is part of the UNC community, which I think you have to even be in this colloquium setting right now, there are plenty of resources here for you to connect with. And I think in the beginning, there was a listing of the Heals Care Network that offers a whole bunch of resources for you to consider and reach out to. This is a question, what would you need from UNC Police? I am a 911 telecommunicator. I would love for more police to be CIT trained. I think that would be a good step. But I also think that these types of conversations about historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, and structural violence should also be training opportunities offered to the police force, and not just at UNC, but everywhere in our country. Okay, let me see here. Let me check my time real quick. Okay, we got some time. You all please feel free to ask a couple more questions or make comments.
April, are you seeing the questions that are in the queue?
I am seeing a couple of them, but I haven't been taking the ones that I've responded to out.
I
So
have, I think.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one. Any advice on the balancing act of speaking for BIPOC without speaking over, so they don't always have to speak up? Oh, okay. I may be misinterpreting this, but maybe you're talking about like without having to raise your voice or interrupt. Maybe if you can confirm that in a comment. Sarah, can folks unmute? Are they able to?
I can unmute people, yes.
Okay, Arlene, if you could unmute Arlene, so I can just get clarification before I answer.
Okay, Arlene, you should be good to talk.
Hey, Arlene, sorry to ask you to do that, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. Okay, so there is a comment in here. When you see something that impacts BIPOC, speaking up so BIPOC aren't always having to do it. Yes, so I'm glad I asked for clarification because that's not what I was thinking. Wow, so I can share with you some things that I've done at UNC and outside of UNC, is hold like conversation circles so that people can talk and learn how to do that, like how to speak up so that BIPOC people aren't always having to be the ones to address something, because sometimes, and I've been in this situation, I feel like if I'm either the only one or two BIPOC person in the space, and if I don't say something, it's likely not to get said. And sometimes I feel tired. I don't want to have to always be the person to say something. But I also have learned that some people just aren't aware of when microaggressions are occurring. And so that is a barrier for people, allies, I would say, of the BIPOC community, that if they don't recognize the moment of when to speak up, that's an issue. So I recommend some trainings to increase your self-awareness. I recommend engaging in conversation with people in the community that are different from you so that you can learn their experiences. I think Dr. Cox is taking their perspective, learning about cultural differences so that you can not just learn those things to say you know them, but so that you can understand the impact of what is happening on that BIPOC person. That's the part that I think a lot of people don't recognize, is that there is an impact for every microaggression. There's an impact for every community trauma that is experienced. But you won't know that if people don't tell you. Okay. Now I see here. There are a lot of questions in here, y'all, or comments.
April, this is Amy. Are you
Yeah.
able to address the list of resources that folks may want about trauma-informed community engagement?
Yeah, I just saw that one. So it says, do you have a list of resources about trauma-informed community engagement? I do, and it's at the end of this PowerPoint, and I'm happy to share that with you all. I can get it to Sarah, and we can maybe distribute that list at some point, or you can contact me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can send it to everyone who has RSVP'd so they can have that
Excellent.
resource list. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Here's the question here. How do we show allyship and care to our peers from afar, even when we don't fully relate to or understand their needs? That's a very thoughtful question. And I think taking the approach of the cultural humility in everything that you do is always a good first step. It shows care. You approach someone with curiosity and you leave space for empathy. And I think that's how you show care when you approach anyone in any community, even if you don't understand what they're experiencing. But maybe there's something in your life that that you can relate it to. Okay, so there is a question here regarding social cohesion. So social cohesion is when in communities, of course, there are going to be a whole lot of dynamics going on, right? You have folks with a whole lot of different backgrounds, a whole lot of different histories. So how do you get folks to come together and actually work together as a unit, as a cohesive unit? How do you do that? How do you do that without someone coming in from the outside? And how do you do it as a natural member of that community. There has to be some common goals. Listening sessions help, community meetings, community activities, gathering people with common interest. Maybe it's like a walking group, maybe it's a mindfulness group. There are ways that communities can work together, but you have to take a risk and do something that's going to help to bring people together from no matter where they're starting from. So that could include, from the children in the community to the elderly folks in the community. There's a whole lot of space within there for cohesion. So I hope that helps to answer that question. Right now, in these days, I often feel like our communities can be divided very easily. And a divided community doesn't function as well as one with social cohesion. There are some links that are being put in the chat about the Hills Care Network and the hub of resources that you can use. And Sarah put in a link to the resource list. Thank you for that. I think I've gotten the most recent questions here. If it might be a good time for folks to take a break. What do you think?
Terrific. Thank you so much, April. Really appreciate that. A great presentation and you fielding questions from our community after. There are clearly a lot of folks who are invested in this topic and interested in hearing more. That's wonderful that you have provided a list of additional resources, and those indeed are in the chat. And we'll also make sure that when we post the presentations following this colloquium up to our website connected through the Heals Care Network, that will also be included. So folks can go thereafter, even if they weren't available today to join us. So next up, we're going to talk about how mental health impacts and intersects with people of various identities and create an opportunity for a truly interactive kind of conversation. We're going to do that through some breakout rooms. The conversation will begin at 2 p.m. We'll all convene in one room, and then we will coordinate the breakout rooms from there so that you can choose the intersection of identity that you would be most interested in. So please click into the Zoom meeting at go.unc.edu/MH breakouts. And I think we're going to, we've got it up on the screen there for you. I beg your pardon. So please go to that link at 2 o'clock. You can join actually now if you wish, but the introduction and the conversation will begin at 2. Please make sure, because we'll all be convening together in the beginning, please make sure that you join and you are muted at the time and your camera is off so that we can ensure that I am able to do a quick introduction of our various breakout room and conversation facilitators and have them do a quick soft shoe about themselves and what their relationship is to the university, and then we'll send folks to their respective rooms. So we look forward to seeing you at 2 o'clock for what we know has been thus far anyway, a very popular aspect of today's program, and hope you'll be able to join us. See you at 2, if not a few minutes earlier.